The end game, Pamela, for Mexico, regardless of what the immigration package looks like, if it is to be approved on Capitol Hill, is twofold. We have to ensure that every single Mexican that crosses the border into the United States does so through a designated port of entry, and that every single Mexican crossing into the United States does so legally. If we can't do that, it's going to be very tough to convince the American public and American Congress that Mexico is a co-stakeholder to a system which is functional, which is humane, which is orderly, which is legal, and which respects the rights of people crossing the border. And that is the same challenge we face as we look south, because Mexico is no longer just a country of emigrants. We have become a country of immigrants coming for jobs in the coffee plantations in Chiapas from Central America, but we've also become, more importantly, a transit point of immigrants from South America and Central America moving through Mexico on their way to the United States. And this poses unique challenges also for our domestic legislation, for our policy of ensuring that we are respecting the human rights of those crossing Mexican territory, because it's very easy for Mexico to wag its finger at the United States and demand respect for the human rights of its migrants. But if we can't do the same for the migrants of Central American nations transiting through Mexico, our moral standing is greatly diminished.
Let me change topics to something equally challenging, the issue of security. We all know that Mexico has a long-standing problem with organized crime. President Calderón's decision during the first days of his administration to move against the drug cartels was not only commendable and valiant, it was necessary and, quite frankly, long overdue. Yet the explosion of violence, the murders, the kidnappings, the extortion, the armed robberies that has accompanied this offensive, and evidence that some of this violence is flowing over into the U.S. Across the border, obviously makes Americans quite uncomfortable. Further, the admission by key government officials involved in the security ministries that they never expected such a violent reaction from the cartels raises questions in our minds here in the United States, and I have to assume, I have to imagine, in minds in Mexico, about the government's ability to succeed in this endeavor. So with that preface, what exactly is the government's strategy? And how does the Calderón government define success?
The strategy is three-pronged, and in many ways, it defines success. For starters, there is no victory in the fight against drugs in the traditional way that you define an armed conflict or a soccer game. Because A, the demand for drugs is inelastic, and as long as Mexico sits next to the largest consumer market of illicit drugs in the world, that is still going to drive the traffic and production of illicit substances. But what is Mexico trying to achieve? A, that we bring down the levels of violent-related deaths in Mexico. And in no way with what I'm about to say here am I trying to minimize what's at stake in Mexico or what has been going on in Mexico. But let me give you some numbers that I think are important to put the violence that is taking place in Mexico into context. For every 100,000 inhabitants today, you have 11 drug-related deaths, violent deaths in Mexico. Today in the United States, for every 100,000 inhabitants, you have 10 violent-related deaths. The city of New Orleans, just the city of New Orleans, has 33 violent deaths per every 100,000 inhabitants. The city of Caracas has 90 violent deaths per every 100,000 inhabitants. Is the ambassador trying to brush the violence under the rug? No. But what I am trying to point at is that A, it is not generalized. It is a direct response to the willingness of the state to roll back and shut down organized crime. It is a direct consequence of trafficking patterns and trafficking lanes and staging grounds being disrupted and of drug syndicates fighting against one another. There's a figure that has been thrown out there regarding the number of deaths that we have seen in Mexico since the Mexican government unleashed this rollback strategy to push back on organized crime. 10,000 something violent deaths in Mexico in 2 years. Now, of all those deaths, 80% of those deaths are drug traffickers, either killed by the state or that have been killed by rival drug gangs. 12% are of police officers and members of the armed forces who've been killed in line of duty. And 8% are unfortunately and tragically people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So what we're trying to achieve is bring down the level of violence being unleashed by the drug syndicates against society. The second driver of what will mean success is, contrary to what you do when you're trying to promote business in a country or foreign direct investment, we are raising the opportunity cost of doing business in Mexico. We're trying to make it so prohibitively expensive for the drug syndicates to operate in Mexico that they pack up and go somewhere else. It's as simple as that.